Hello friends, and welcome back to another video. Today we are talking about gay nuns, a topic that I am very excited about. In fact, this will not be the end of our conversation about gay nuns. If you came here to hear about the queer antics of insane medieval nuns, there's going to be a whole sequel to this video on that. This video is covering mostly stories from the 20th century, but I promise you it will be spicy nonetheless. But before we get into it, I need to tell you a little bit about this video's sponsor, Function of Beauty. Function of Beauty creates customized hair care products because everyone's hair type is unique. You just fill out their quiz outlining your hair type, your goals for your hair, and Function of Beauty will generate your custom formula. You even get to pick fun stuff like the color and the fragrance of your products. Eucalyptus, my beloved. I've been using Function of Beauty for many years now and I really like it. Probably the biggest change that I've noticed with my hair over time is that it's a lot less frizzy than it used to be. I used to be constantly worried about my hair being this giant, horrible, frizzy monster on my head. But my favorite thing about Function of Beauty is probably that the hair care products you use can evolve with your changing needs over time. You go through a phase where you dye your hair different colors every week. You cut it all off with craft scissors on a whim. I don't know, hypothetical situations that I've totally never done before. Your Function of Beauty order can evolve with your needs. And of course, all products contain no parabens or sulfates and are 100% vegan and cruelty-free. Now it's easier than ever to try Function of Beauty's top-rated signature hair duo. You can get 20% off your first 16-ounce set. That's these big boys right here when you use my link in the description below. I'd also recommend becoming a Function of Beauty member to get all kinds of fun perks like free shipping. Thank you again to Function of Beauty for sponsoring this video, and now back to your regularly scheduled content. The first thing that the internet threw at me when I started searching for queer nuns was the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, which is not really what I was looking for, but I decided to do a little clicking around. Wikipedia defines them as a charity, protest, and street performance organization that uses drag and religious imagery to call attention to sexual intolerance and satirizes issues of gender and morality. The sisters are credited with raising over $1 million for various causes, or almost $40,000 on average per year. That's right, they're flexing on the Catholic Church by being good Catholics. Now, this is not what I was looking for. These are not real nuns. Shocking. But seeing the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence made me think about why we like the idea of queer nuns. Why do I like the idea of queer nuns? I think obviously on a surface level, we love the drama, we love the apparent contradiction there. I think a lot of people like seeing queerness and religious imagery coexist in a way that shows that they're not exclusive. They don't exist in these separate spheres of church good and normal and pure and queerness bad and fringe and degenerate. I think it's cathartic for a lot of us who grew up feeling bitter towards religious communities to see them reconciled in this fun way. And so with those things in mind, I set out to find myself some real queer nuns. So at first queer nuns seemed like a contradiction, right? Something belonging to a satirical drag performance. But then you think about it, and it makes complete sense. It makes perfect sense. In the introduction of Lesbian Nuns Breaking Silence, Rosemary Curb writes, "If our culture defines normality in terms of male experience and values only women who relate to men, both nuns and lesbians tend to be ridiculed or dismissed as irrelevant. Eschewing the cosmetics and costumes of the commercially promoted feminine mystique," that's shade at Betty Friedan, by the way, the national organization president who called lesbians a lavender menace and gave rise to Lavender Menace. Anyway, both nuns and lesbians are emotionally inaccessible to male coercion. You know, I have always said, if I was born in a worse time, TM, worse time, TM, oh buddy, I'd be running away to the convent so fast. You get to escape from marriage and having children. I mean, technically nuns are married to Jesus. We're gonna get into an interesting loophole in that when we get to our insane medieval nuns. I'm looking at you, Benedetta. But you get to escape from heteronormative expectations, you have time to educate yourself, pursue your hobbies, write books. There have been lots of really interesting and influential intellectual badass nuns. Teresa of Avila, Hildegard of Bingen, Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, to name a few. Like I said, I'm 100% sold on the convent. Worst time she's going to the convent. She was gonna get so witch burned otherwise, so sold on the convent. And when Sister Eunice over there starts looking real good, you don't have to worry that much about getting caught. At least not nearly as much as queer men had to worry about it. For a long time there was no laws specifically forbidding sex between women. There was laws that vaguely mentioned unnatural acts, but it was nothing like the very clear sodomy laws that existed towards queer men. In some cases those sodomy laws would be applied just as harshly to queer women, but those were usually cases involving material instruments. Two nuns were in fact burned at the stake in the 16th century for using material instruments. I don't want to know what DIY medieval shit. But that was very, very rare. Just because those sodomy laws could technically be applied to queer women, they almost never were. Almost no cases were actually prosecuted. Because there was this perception that two women physically could not have sex because no penis, no sex. As we know, the world revolves around penises. So no penis? What are you doing? What could they possibly be doing? It really only became like a burned at the stake level problem if there was some kind of a threat to the male role, i.e. material instruments or cross-dressing. Besides that, male writers simply did not acknowledge or did not want to acknowledge romantic and sexual relationships between women. The Bible passage that comes the closest to mentioning homosexuality between women is Romans 1:26, and I think it's just an amazing microcosm for this entire issue. For this reason, God gave them up to dishonorable passions. Their women exchanged natural relations for unnatural, and men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were consumed with passion for one another. Men committing shameless acts with men. The men are having sex with each other. The men are consumed with passion for one another. The men. Two men, they have given up women, and the two men are having sex with each other. Women are committing unnatural acts. Don't worry about what a number of things that could possibly ever mean. I just think it's so funny. Like, yeah, that's it. That's the attitude towards queer women. So all of that being said, if you were a queer woman in a different time, you wanted to escape from existing in a heterosexual society, having to perform gender roles, the convent was where it was at. The convent was lit and absolutely saturated with your fellow queers. So I picked up the 1985 book, Lesbian Nuns Breaking Silence, widely considered the book on lesbian nuns. And yes, I am proud that I tracked down a copy that isn't the god-awful clip art looking 2013 reprint. Thank you for asking. I entered the convent to lead the perfect life, to live among women, to avoid marriage, to go through medical school, to live adventurously as a missionary in Africa or Korea or South America, and to dedicate my life to the service of women and children. If we think in terms of the church's power over us, then of course it was repressive, but somehow that autonomous community of women eluded direct male domination. I had an incredibly positive experience with nuns as a child. That's why I became one. It was the attraction to grown women who were different from the other adult women I saw around me. Single professional women whom I knew lacked the friendship and sense of family with other women that nuns had. In the convent, everyone had a job. Unlike my house where girls did the housework and the boys were allowed to go free, I saw equal division of work. There were no roles or privileges like my father and brothers had in my house. No more sadness, no more trying to be understood by my family or to meet their unspoken demands, no more struggling to fit in with friends. Safe inside the novitiate, I've just turned 18. We join clergy and parishioners in civil rights marches and freedom marches, we watch news on television, and are expected to vote if of age. No one discouraged me from studying any subject because I was a woman. On the contrary, I was encouraged to excel. In high school too, I was attracted to nuns because they were such independent women. I especially remember the nun who taught me literature and creative writing. She was bright, witty, strong, nonconformist, athletic, and had a man's name. I wanted to be like her. Public models for service and adventure among women were scarce at the time. Nuns seemed to exemplify best what I wanted to do. Vaguely, I was aware that entering the convent was a way of putting off facing the inevitable question of my sexuality, and continuing the good life of high school, and of giving my life some meaning. Believing that service and commitment to God would squelch the passionate desire I felt for women, I jumped into religious life at 18 with 70 women my age. There was something very seductive about contemplative life for me. It meant total freedom from having to relate to the world at all. The women who share their stories in this book wanted to become nuns for various reasons, some of them including freedom from social obligations, education all the way up to doctorates in some cases, to have careers in a time where it wasn't always encouraged for women to do so, although nuns' careers did tend to be limited to either nurse or teacher, to contribute to their communities, to have a purpose, to live among women away from the male gaze. The convent was where it was at. Sort of. There did end up being some pretty big deal breakers with living your life within the institution of the Catholic Church. One thing that drove a lot of these women to leave the convents, especially given that they were queer, was the policing of particular friendships, which is just the gayest sounding thing I've ever heard in my life. And it's true that homosexuality between women was never really acknowledged or criminally punished to the degree that male homosexuality was, but without ever saying a lot about why the church has always been very interested in close relationships between nuns. In the year 423, yes, 423, St. Augustine wrote this letter to a group of nuns that his sister had just joined, and he had to say, "The love between you, however, ought not to be earthly but spiritual. For the things which shameless women do, even to other women in low jokes and games, are to be avoided not only by widows and chaste handmaids of Christ, living under the holy rule of life, but also entirely by married women and maidens destined for marriage. Ladies, stop having gay sex. It's never okay, especially not for the handmaidens of Christ." From the Middle Ages all the way through the 20th century, convents banned particular friendships, which is just, I can't get particular French, that's gay, that's so, oh. And the way they defined particular friendships was very vague. It was just any sort of exclusive intimacy with another nun, just having a best friend, basically, was not allowed. Nuns were not allowed to show any favoritism to any specific other nun. They were expected to spend their times socializing in large groups. Apparently, the rationale that some convents gave was that if you focus your energy only on like a specific person or a few specific people, then the community will suffer. Arguably, the first recorded warning against particular friendships that we have is from some guy, some bishop. Anyway, it was the 7th century. And our boy said that none take the hand of another or call one another little girl. No calling each other romantic pet names, essentially, although I know. It is forbidden lest any take the hand of another for delight, or stand or walk around or sit together. She who does so will be improved with 12 blows, and anyone who is called little girl, or who call one another little girl, 40 blows if they so transgress. Each should sleep in a separate bed, and they should accept bedding according to the arrangements of the couches, as the mother directs. If possible, all should sleep in one place, but if the large numbers do not allow this, they should rest by 10s and 20s with the elders who have charge of them. Lights should burn in each chamber until daybreak. They should sleep clothed, in their girdles, bound and always ready for divine service with all gravity and modesty. And when the signal is given, each should hurry to get to the work of God with no delay before the others. They should not have the younger sisters with them in the bed, but be joined by elders or groups. Rising, they should exhort each other to the work of God against any excuses of the sleepy. Sir, are you sure you don't think lesbian sex exists? 'Cause this was written in the 7th century, and honestly, not a lot changed. Particular friendships were very heavily policed in a lot of convents, although it does seem like there was the odd one that was very relaxed. Then in the summer of 73, I'm working at a summer camp in the National Forest with a few Sisters of St. Joseph helping out. Beautiful. You're gay. Well, I'm minding my own business, being a good camp counselor, when Sister Beth comes on to me like a diesel dyke in a honky-tonk bar. For the next 2.5 years, I hitchhike from Southern California to her convent in the Midwest to visit her whenever I can. My first serious lover. My head is changing. I'm ready to say I'm a lesbian. But she's a nun, and getting ready to take her final vows. She wants me to be in the ceremony, give the homily. Wait a minute, what kind of a lie is this? She's preparing to make a promise of celibacy in front of everybody, and she still wants me whenever she can get me? Come on now. Come on now, Sister Beth. What the fuck is this? People always found their ways to live their weird gray areas. But in most convents, transfers to split up two women who were getting too close was extremely common. They were constantly worried about getting kicked out if they failed evaluations or psych tests, which was terrifying for a lot of women who didn't have any family or outside life to go back to. Nuns who were suspected of deviant behavior could be sent to mental institutions, given drugs and even electroshock therapy against their wills. They didn't really know what the nuns could possibly be doing without any penises, but there was some kind of wacky reason why they could never, under any circumstances, be allowed to get too close. The reason why convents were ultimately an unfulfilling place to be for women who sought them out as refuges from patriarchal society and conventional gender roles was this ban on ever forming true close relationships with other people and the intense guilt that they were made to feel over having any wrong thought, including the desire for friends. Ugh, the day-to-day Catholic of it all. Most of them never had dramatic movie scene secret romances with other nuns. They just wanted friends and the freedom to express themselves. One woman writes, "We need a theology that deals with human freedom and respects our ability to choose the objects of our love responsibly. As a lesbian, I refuse to accept a theology which robs us of our freedom in order to absolve us of our quote-unquote guilt. We are called to love. How dare we not love?" The 60s and 70s brought about a mass exodus of nuns from the church. And I do have to briefly get into some church history here and acknowledge that this was very tied up with the Second Vatican Council in 1965, often called Vatican II. Basically, it was an effort to update the practices of the Catholic Church to the 20th century, including a lot of changes to the way that nuns lived. You'd think, intuitively, as I did, that modernizing would be good. After Vatican II, nuns became a lot less isolated from the world, and you'd think the nuns would be happy about that, but it was the opposite. A lot of women who share their stories in this book were like, "No, fuck this, I came here to escape the world. I came here because I wanted to wear this ridiculous outfit and pray in Latin. What do you mean we're translating the haunting hymns to English and going to live in the city and having to socialize with other religious groups or work in chaotic downtown hospitals?" These decades were also a really important transition time between women who didn't really fit into patriarchal society having to run away to the convent to get any sanity, and then being able to live autonomous lives, queer lives, even if they wanted. So a lot of women, faced with these massive changes to the church and faced with the possibility of the real world, just chose the real world, which had one very interesting side effect for the gay community. Around the 70s and 80s, we start seeing ex-nuns become extremely prominent within gay rights groups. There was a very obvious nun to activist pipeline going on. Jean Cordova, one of the contributors to the book, said in an interview with the Los Angeles Times, "The movement for social justice in the 70s and 80s were replete with ex-nun lesbian leadership. I've come to see the convent as a boot camp for us all." Which again, seems wacky, but then you think about it and it makes complete sense. Becoming a nun to begin with takes someone with an interest in social justice and serving their community. It's described as a life of service. The book's contributors include 2 former directors of the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, Virginia Apuzzo and Jean O'Leary, 7 officers of the National Organization for Women, founders of various lesbian and feminist publications, as well as authors of books, many accomplished professors and academics. Pretty much all of them describe themselves as activists in some kind of way. Cordova, the woman who called the convent's lesbian social justice boot camp, she was one of the organizers of the fight against California's sodomy laws, leading to the decriminalization of homosexuality. And I'm sure you could argue that, like, yes, activists and writers and all of these people are probably overrepresented by this book because those are the types of people who are more likely to be publishing their stories in an anthology, whatever. But at the same time, if we have this many queer ex-nuns in the gay rights movement telling their stories, how many must there be that aren't writing about it in books? Another story that I found online was about Bridget Kroll and Chris Morrissey, who were a couple that met as nuns. They were lifelong activists. They paved the way in the 90s for Canadian immigration law to apply equally to same-sex partners and spoke up about inequalities in healthcare and senior care until Kroll's death in 2016. And that is the thing, isn't it? Most of these women are dead or in their 80s and 90s. It's becoming no longer the case that ex-nuns are so prominent within the gay community, but I get the impression that just a few decades ago, ex-nuns were very prominent in the gay community, and I find it so interesting. But stepping back for just a moment, not all lesbian nuns from the book, Lesbian Nuns, not all lesbian nuns are ex-nuns. Some of the women who contributed are still nuns, and they identify very much with the calling to be a nun and with queer identity, and it's a source of deep pain for them that the Catholic Church rejects the type of relationships that they want. The dream life that they describe would be one where they can live openly as lesbians and nuns. For some women, the lack of freedom afforded by the Church was too much for them, but for others, it's a compromise they're willing to make. And others, like Sister Beth, have some kind of whole other bonkers arrangement going on where they are able to fulfill those 2 parts of themselves easily. The whole spectrum is out there and is possible. That pretty much concludes the educational portion of this video, but I want to say a little more because researching this has definitely hit on something personal to me, and I think filled in a puzzle piece of my own identity that I didn't even really know how to fully articulate until now. I was never a nun, obviously, but I went to a very small all-girls Catholic school throughout middle and high school, and let me tell ya, there is just something about being isolated from normal society and socialization with a tight-knit group of girls that just makes you weird. To begrudgingly use a very overused word, feral. And like a lot of women in this book, I am grateful for that experience. I'm grateful for this weird, intense community of women that let parts of me thrive that I think the outside world would have crushed. And that must be a common experience among queer women. It doesn't have to be a convent, it doesn't even have to be a religious setting. There's a reason I still buy Girl Guide cookies whenever I can, and it's gay nostalgia. I set out to research a video about insane medieval nuns, and this one just grew off of that idea like a tumor because I ended up finding out that nuns are a huge part of our history as queer women, and their experiences are still so relevant to the way that we relate to the world and to communities of women and to our own queerness. So with that groundwork, and I hope that appreciation of nuns, we will go forward together to the insane medieval nuns. I'll see you there very soon. In the meantime, you can support me on Patreon if you would like. I do live streams every single Wednesday in my Patreon Discord server. You can ask me your questions, show me your stupid memes. Sometimes we play Jackbox games or Cards Against Humanity. It's a fun time, and you can check it out for the low, low price of $2 a month. Thank you so much for watching, my friends. Strange out. I've never said strange out before. Strange out. Oh, that's horrible. I should say it more often.